Not every galaxy adventure was a hit when it first landed. Some crashed hard, losing money and baffling critics. But here's the twist. Those so-called failures turned out to be treasures waiting for rediscovery. Why did audiences ignore them, only for fans decades later to swear by their brilliance? Maybe the future always arrives a little too soon. Get ready, because the box office bombs we're about to revisit might just be better than the blockbusters you thought you loved. Flash Gordon, 1980. This wasn't just a space opera. It was a glitter-soaked carnival of color, sound, and style. When Flash Gordon debuted in 1980, critics shrugged, and audiences largely stayed away. To most moviegoers, it seemed like a bizarre mix of old comic strip camp with disco-era excess. But hiding beneath the neon visuals and the dazzling costumes was a movie that dared to be unapologetically fun at a time when science fiction was getting darker and more serious. The film had everything working for spectacle: dazzling sets, ornate costumes, and a soundtrack by none other than Queen. Freddie Mercury's booming vocals gave the movie an energy few films of the era could match. Yet despite all that, the film stumbled. Part of the problem was timing. Just 3 years earlier, Star Wars had redefined the space opera genre with high-stakes drama and polished special effects. Compared to that, Flash Gordon's campy tone looked outdated, almost like a relic from Saturday morning television. But here's the thing about too much color, too much camp, too much over-the-top acting. With time, all of that became exactly what made Flash Gordon irresistible. Today, it's celebrated as a cult masterpiece. Directors like Edgar Wright and Taika Waititi have cited it as inspiration. The costumes are still cosplayed at conventions. And that Queen theme song? It's immortal, blasting through sports arenas and commercials long after the film left theaters. Flash Gordon teaches us something Hollywood often forgets. Not every story needs to be gritty or brooding to matter. Sometimes, a ridiculous amount of style and pure fun is all it takes to carve out legend status. Critics dismissed it. Audiences skipped it. But decades later, Flash Gordon is proof that a failure can age better than most box office giants. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. On paper, this film looked like nothing more than a knockoff. After all, Battle Beyond the Stars arrived just 3 years after Star Wars, and everyone could see the similarities. Spaceships, intergalactic villains, ragtag heroes banding together to save the day. It was easy for critics to roll their eyes. But here's the plot twist. This bargain-budget imitation became the unlikely birthplace of some of Hollywood's most influential careers. Produced by Roger Corman, the king of low-budget cinema, Battle Beyond the Stars was essentially the Magnificent Seven in space. Instead of gunfighters, the film gathered a crew of strange alien mercenaries to protect a peaceful planet from invasion. The movie had ambition far beyond its means. With a budget of just $2 million, it had to deliver big effects on pennies compared to Star Wars blockbuster resources. Enter a young set designer named James Cameron. Yes, that James Cameron. Tasked with making spaceships look epic on a shoestring, he poured every ounce of creativity into the film's production design. The results may have looked rough in 1980, but they paved the way for the skills he later unleashed in The Terminator, Aliens, and Titanic. At release, the film underperformed. Critics called it derivative, and audiences mostly stayed away. But with time, Battle Beyond the Stars transformed into a cult legend. Fans appreciated its scrappy inventiveness, the strange mix of practical effects and wild character designs, and the heart behind its underdog story. It's not remembered as the film that copied Star Wars. It's remembered as the film that showed a generation of filmmakers how to innovate when money was scarce. Today, cinephiles talk about Battle Beyond the Stars not as a failure, but as the scrappy gem that launched a blockbuster legacy. In other words, the cheap knockoff turned out to be far richer than anyone guessed. Krull, 1983. If you were a kid in the early 1980 seconds, you probably saw posters for Krull and thought it was going to change your life. A glowing cosmic glaive, a princess in peril, A hero setting out to fight an alien fortress that literally teleports across the landscape. On paper, this was the next Star Wars. But when it finally hit theaters in 1983, it didn't blast into orbit, it crashed. Hard. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Was it a fantasy epic? Was it science fiction? Krull didn't fit neatly into either box, and that confused marketing teams and audiences alike. The movie had cost a fortune for the time, with elaborate sets and practical effects that pushed its budget far higher than producers expected. Yet, despite the investment, the movie's box office was a disappointment. Viewers shrugged and moved on. But here's the secret that time revealed. Krull is a world builder's dream. Its mix of medieval fantasy and space opera wasn't a failure, it was ahead of its time. The shape-shifting beast, the fire mares galloping across alien fields, and the legendary glaive became visual icons for kids who stumbled upon it later on cable and VHS. And let's not forget the cast. A young Liam Neeson makes an appearance, long before he became Hollywood royalty. Robbie Coltrane also shows up, years before he'd be known worldwide as Hagrid. Looking back, Krull is packed with the kind of imagination modern blockbusters often lack. Fans now treat Krull as one of the great hidden gems of the genre. It's a story that didn't hit the jackpot in its day, but has slowly gained a reputation as an ambitious oddball that dared to mix swords, sorcery, and spaceships. Was it a bomb? Absolutely. But sometimes, the biggest misfires burn the brightest in the long run. The Last Starfighter, 1984. This film dared to answer a wish every gamer secretly had. What if your video game skills actually made you the chosen hero of the galaxy? The Last Starfighter gave us that fantasy in 1984, making it one of the first major films to weave arcade culture into its DNA. Yet, despite its groundbreaking ideas and use of computer-generated effects, the movie struggled to find its footing at the box office. The premise was perfect for the time. Alex Rogan, a teenager stuck in a trailer park, beats the high score on a local arcade machine. What he doesn't know is that the game was a recruitment test, and his skills are needed in a very real interstellar war. Suddenly, he's whisked into an alien armada and told that only he can save the galaxy. It was a story that blended coming-of-age charm with full-blown cosmic stakes. The problem? The movie was way ahead of its time in its use of CGI. While audiences today might marvel at its pioneering spirit, in 1984 the visuals looked strange and cold compared to the practical models people were used to in Star Wars or Star Trek. Critics dismissed it, and the box office didn't come close to covering the ambition behind the film. But like all the best cult classics, The Last Starfighter refused to fade away. Kids who caught it on VHS or television became lifelong fans, enchanted by the story's heart and the audacity of its vision. Today, it's recognized as a pioneer in digital effects and a cornerstone of sci-fi storytelling. For many, it's still the ultimate wish fulfillment movie, a reminder that anyone, even a kid stuck in a dusty trailer park, might secretly be the galaxy's greatest hope. Dune, 1984. Few films embody the phrase misunderstood masterpiece quite like David Lynch's Dune. Based on Frank Herbert's towering novel, the 1984 adaptation was hyped as the next big space opera event. Studios expected another Star Wars. What they got was something far stranger. Critics called it confusing, audiences left scratching their heads, and the box office receipts were a desert wasteland. But here's the twist. The very weirdness that doomed it in 1984 is exactly what makes it fascinating now. Lynch didn't make a clean-cut blockbuster. He made a fever dream of whispered prophecies, Baroque costumes, and grotesque villains. Audiences expecting a popcorn thrill ride got dense political intrigue, surreal dream sequences, and a mythology so deep it felt like falling into quicksand. The sets were lavish, the special effects inventive, and the cast stacked with talent: Kyle MacLachlan, Patrick Stewart, and Sting, in a role no one can forget. Yet studio meddling hacked down Lynch's original vision, cutting hours of material and leaving a film that felt more like fragments of genius than a complete whole. Critics pounced, and Dune became shorthand for flop. And yet, it wouldn't die. Fans began trading stories about Lynch's longer cut, piecing together deleted footage, and treating the film like a buried artifact. Over the years, appreciation grew for its ambition. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's strange. But no other adaptation captured the sheer, otherworldly strangeness of Herbert's novel quite like Lynch's version. Now, with Denis Villeneuve's modern take reigniting interest, the 1984 Dune has been reclaimed as a cult icon. It's proof that sometimes a film isn't made to please everyone, it's made to push boundaries, even if the audience takes decades to catch up. Spacehunter. Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. Sometimes the title alone tells you everything. Spacehunter. Adventures in the Forbidden Zone wasn't trying to be subtle. It promised a pulpy, over-the-top sci-fi adventure in a faraway galaxy, and that's exactly what it delivered. Released in 1983 as part of Hollywood's brief obsession with 3D movies, it was meant to ride the post-Star Wars wave. Instead, it barely made a splash. The story followed Wolf, a grizzled interstellar scavenger who answers a distress signal and winds up battling mutants, scavengers, and a deranged warlord. On paper, it was the kind of straightforward action tale audiences usually loved. But timing and execution worked against it. The 3D gimmick, meant to be its big selling point, felt more like a distraction than an innovation. Without the glasses, the movie looked strange, and with them, the visuals didn't always line up. Critics dismissed it as another cheap Star Wars clone, but here's the truth. Spacehunter was pure pulp joy. The sets were imaginative, the villains memorably grotesque, and the film leaned hard into its Saturday matinee energy. It even featured a young Molly Ringwald, years before she became a teen icon, injecting spunk and humor into a genre that often took itself too seriously. Over time, Spacehunter found its tribe. Fans began to celebrate it for exactly what it was, a scrappy, B-movie space opera that wore its flaws proudly. It may not have had the polish of Star Wars, but it had personality, and that's something money can't buy. Today, it's remembered not for the gimmick that doomed it, but for the strange, scrappy spirit that made it unforgettable. Starchaser, The Legend of Orin, 1985. Before CGI became mainstream, filmmakers were experimenting with new ways to bring depth to animated worlds. Starchaser. The Legend of Orin promised something ambitious, a fully animated feature presented in 3D. Released in 1985, it was marketed as a bold step forward for both animation and science fiction. The result? Financial disaster. At its core, Starchaser was a classic hero's journey. Orin, a young slave, discovers a mystical sword and embarks on a quest across the galaxy to free his people from oppression. The parallels to Star Wars were impossible to ignore. Critics hammered it as a knockoff, and audiences didn't know what to make of an animated space opera pitched at teenagers and adults. Animation in the 1980 seconds was still seen as for kids, and the idea of combining it with darker themes and experimental 3D was too much for mainstream viewers. Yet, that very strangeness is what makes it fascinating now. The animation was bold for its time, mixing vibrant colors with dynamic camera movements that hinted at what digital animation would later achieve. The world building was expansive, with alien landscapes, sinister machines, and a mythology that felt bigger than its budget. The movie may have bombed, but collectors and animation fans rediscovered it in the 2000 seconds, praising its risk-taking spirit. In retrospect, Starchaser was less a Star Wars imitation and more a strange evolutionary link between traditional animation and the digital revolutions that followed. It was too ambitious for 1985, but today, that ambition is exactly what makes it great. Solarbabies, 1986. Now here's a wild one. Imagine a post-apocalyptic world where kids strapped on roller skates to fight tyranny, and you've got Solarbabies. Released in 1986, this movie was supposed to be a slick, youth-friendly sci-fi adventure. Instead, it became one of the most notorious financial disasters of the decade. The budget ballooned out of control, the story baffled audiences, and critics tore it apart. But the very elements that doomed Solarbabies are what make it unforgettable today. The film follows a group of orphans living under the thumb of a water-controlling dictatorship. When they discover a mysterious, glowing sphere that seems to hold magical powers, they set off on a journey that mixes rebellion, friendship, and, yes, roller skating chases across the desert. It was bizarre, overproduced, and unlike anything else in theaters. The failure was so epic that even Mel Brooks, who produced it, later joked about how much money it lost him. Audiences stayed away, confused by its tone. Was it a kids' movie? Was it a serious sci-fi drama? The answer was somewhere in between, and that middle ground didn't sell. Yet, in the decades since, Solarbabies has carved out cult status. Fans adore its sheer weirdness. The neon visuals, the roller skates, the blend of Mad Max grit and Saturday morning cartoon energy. It may have been a disaster at the box office, but as a curiosity, it's one of the most entertaining bombs of the 1,980 seconds. Sometimes greatness isn't about perfection. Sometimes it's about going so far off the rails that you end up creating something no one else would ever dare attempt. Enemy Mine, 1985. At first glance, Enemy Mine looked like it had all the makings of a hit. A big-budget studio release, a respected director in Wolfgang Peterson, and two powerhouse leads, Dennis Quaid and Louis Gossett Jr. But when it landed in 1985, it fizzled out at the box office. The reason? Audiences weren't ready for a space opera that swapped constant battles for an intimate story of survival and friendship. The film begins as a fairly standard sci-fi conflict. Quaid plays a human pilot, Gossett Jr., a reptilian alien from a rival species. They crash on a hostile planet and, forced to rely on one another, slowly realize they aren't enemies after all. It's part Robinson Crusoe, part buddy drama wrapped in space opera visuals. Instead of focusing on fleets of ships blasting each other, Enemy Mine zoomed in on two characters, learning that their similarities mattered more than their differences. Critics at the time didn't know what to make of it. Some found it slow, others mocked the alien makeup, and with marketing that promised an action-packed adventure, audiences felt misled. The movie tanked, and Fox took a huge loss. But here's the truth. Enemy Mine was ahead of its time. Its message of empathy, of breaking down barriers, resonates louder today than ever. Louis Gossett Jr.'s performance as the alien Jariba, Jerry Shigan, is still celebrated as one of the most heartfelt roles in sci-fi. The film's landscapes, shot in Iceland, gave it a haunting, otherworldly feel that stuck with viewers long after the credits rolled. In the decades since, Enemy Mine has been reappraised as a gem of 1,980-second sci-fi. Its quiet courage to tell a story about connection rather than constant conflict turned it from a flop into a classic. Sometimes greatness isn't loud, it's deeply human. Treasure Planet, 2002. Disney bet big on this one. A sci-fi reimagining of Treasure Island, complete with space galleons and shimmering cosmic backdrops, Treasure Planet was supposed to bring the studio's golden animation era into the new millennium. Instead, it bombed so badly that it nearly sank the careers of its directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, the same duo who gave the world The Little Mermaid and Aladdin. The numbers were brutal. With a budget north of $140 million, Treasure Planet made barely half that back in theaters. Critics praised its visuals but questioned its tone. Was it a kids' film? Was it aimed at teens? The marketing never figured it out, and audiences stayed away. But let's be honest, this movie was stunning. The fusion of traditional hand-drawn animation with cutting-edge CGI created a look unlike anything else at the time. The Crescent Moon spaceport, the solar sailing ships, the living starfields, it was jaw-dropping. Add to that a surprisingly emotional story between young Jim Hawkins and his complicated relationship with John Silver, and you had something far richer than most Disney adventures. Fans who caught it later on DVD or streaming couldn't believe they had missed it. Treasure Planet wasn't just another animated feature. It was a bold experiment that pushed boundaries. And while Disney may have buried it after its theatrical stumble, fans resurrected it. Today, it's celebrated as one of the studio's most imaginative works, a failure that feels more daring than many hits. Treasure Planet's legacy proves that box office numbers don't always measure heart. Sometimes, the most ambitious leaps take years to be fully appreciated. Titan AE 2000. By the year 2000, the animation landscape was shifting fast. Pixar had stormed the industry with Toy Story, and studios everywhere were chasing the CGI revolution. Into this environment came Titan AE, a hybrid of traditional animation and computer graphics, directed by Don Bluth and Gary Goldman. It was meant to be a bold, edgy adventure for teens. Instead, it was a financial disaster that cost Fox Animation its future. The story was ambitious. Earth is destroyed by an alien force, and humanity's survivors cling to hope in the form of the Titan, a lost ship capable of rebuilding a new world. Young Kale, voiced by Matt Damon, is thrust into the role of reluctant savior, with Drew Barrymore and Bill Pullman rounding out the cast. On paper, it had everything: A-list voices, cutting-edge visuals, and a high-stakes premise. The problem was timing. Audiences weren't used to animated features aimed squarely at older kids and teens. Parents assumed it was too intense for children, while adults dismissed it as a cartoon. Marketing never found the sweet spot, and the box office collapse was brutal. Titan AE grossed less than half its production budget, and Fox Animation shut down shortly after. But here's what history reveals. Titan AE was a pioneer. Its mix of digital backdrops with hand-drawn characters created visuals that still look unique today. Its story, about rebuilding hope after destruction, carried emotional weight that critics later admitted they had overlooked. Fans, especially those who discovered it on DVD, embraced it as a bold, underrated experiment. Yes, Titan AE destroyed a studio, but it also built a legacy as a daring, if flawed, sci-fi opera that pushed boundaries. Today, it's remembered with affection, proof that sometimes even spectacular failures have something valuable to say.